Welcome to In My Own Words, presented by AARP Georgia. I'm your host, Deborah Tyler Horton, AARP Georgia State Director. For the next 30 minutes, we'll take a look at the careers and journeys of individuals who are disrupting the aging process and living their best lives. We hope you will find these conversations informative and inspiring.
New York native Bob Baldwin has recorded on 6 of the 7 inhabitable continents. And while Antarctica is not on his recording bucket list, his international list, including Dubai, Brazil, South America, Spain, the UK, and Canada, are quite impressive. Whether it's a massive festival crowd of 30,000 or an intimate restaurant audience of 60, I refuse to rob my audience of great music and a good experience, says Bob Baldwin. Bob Baldwin, great to see you.
Thank you for having me, Deborah. Good to see you guys. And hello, AARP.
I know how busy you are, and I cannot thank you enough for taking time out to chat with me today. Bob, I'm a native New Yorker. I grew up listening to WBLS radio. You were a radio intern at WBLS. I'm so jealous.
Oh, don't be jealous, Deborah. You know how New Yorkers are. We like to do things a little differently. My stepfather was, his name Albert Lee Gaines, a former Tuskegee Airman. And he was good friends with Percy Sutton, who was also a Tuskegee Airman. They were in the trenches together. And so through a phone call, I was able to do that internship. And I think I caught the radio bug really hot and heavy at that point. Of course, BLS at that time was #1 in the country, and to be an
Mm.
intern there was an honor. I got the original radio bug when I was in college at Geneva College in Beaver Falls, Pennsylvania, and that's how I really caught the bug. But BLS took me over the top.
Well, how did the WBLS experience influence your music career?
Well, it allowed me to see the correlation between music and radio and the key relationships between both of those entities. So it has definitely been an integral part of my music career because my relationship with radio across the country has been very, very strong. So I've been in radio on and off for 40 years and worked in and out of about 6 or 7 different stations. And I have a radio program now called New Urban Jazz, which allows me to be heard on 55 stations around the country.
Awesome. So you've worked with a list of well-known artists. When did you begin composing?
I started composing in college, but my first song that I got placed as a writer was with an artist named James Crabb Robinson, who was a former vocalist for the group called Change. He replaced Luther Vandross before Luther's career took off. And it happened to have featured a saxophonist at that time who nobody knew by the name of Najee, which has gone on to do great things. So I not only was able to get the song placed with James Crabb Robinson, but also had a great soloist to enhance the composition.
Wow. Now I love jazz, but can you help us understand, or maybe it's just me understand, the difference between cool jazz, smooth jazz, contemporary jazz, and urban jazz?
Very good question. Well, the cool jazz era kind of started in the '60s when Miles Davis started changing the sound of his ensemble with Herbie Hancock. Herbie Hancock brought a whole different sound into the jazz world, and then they started plugging the instruments in, doing electric drums, putting the microphone in the kick drum to kind of give it a little bit more groove. And that was the beginning of contemporary jazz when you had guys like Chick Corea and the Crusaders, and Grover Washington was doing funk jazz at that time earlier than most artists. And then it kind of went into smooth in the 1990s, where things it got a little watered down, if you will, and started infusing a little more R&B into the jazz. And of course, jazz and R&B are two African American art forms, so it was a fusion of jazz and R&B, and it's still evolving. It's still morphing. The sound of the drum really takes on a different light with the different styles of jazz, which is why the whole thing changes. It's the same. It's the same 11 notes that we've been playing for thousands of years. It's just how we're applying the sound of music to what we do.
So, a little lesson for me on jazz. But how will you identify your music?
I think I'm contemporary jazz with a touch of urban, little Brazilian, little Latin. It's kind of a mash of all three. Because when I grew up listening to music, my dad turned me on to jazz. On the what they call vinyl, the plastic, the 12-inch, right? And that's where I learned about Oscar Peterson and Miles Davis and Art Tatum and all the great piano players from back in the day. And then my sister down the hall, she had all the R&B records, the Stevie Wonders and the Smokey Robinsons and the Aretha Franklins, and then later on Earth, Wind, and Fire. So I grew up listening, starting with straight ahead, and then I started listening to R&B music and R&B jazz, Earth, Wind, and Fire, and things just kind of evolved from there. But that's kind of when the whole thing started for me.
Well, thank you for sharing that. We know Bob Baldwin, the jazz composer, but who is Bob Baldwin, the person?
Well, again, when I was 5 or 6, my dad turned me on to jazz, and then he got sick when I was 11. So that was kind of my introduction to caregiving. I quickly turned to Bob, the family guy, the humanitarian. But I also love traveling. I love photography. My dad taught me a lot about photography at a young age. I'm a bit of a jokester at times, so you could add that to the list. God fearing and family first. That's the short list.
Well, thank you for sharing that. Bob, we know family is very important to you. You are the caregiver for your mother and another family member. Can you just share what some of the challenges that you've had to face as a caregiver?
Yes. Earlier on, I learned about caregiving at age 11. My father got sick. He had encephalitis, which came on from an appendectomy, excuse me. And so I learned at a very young age what it was like for a family member to get sick. And this is somebody, obviously, my father, who was the caregiver, was the family provider, and for him to just fall ill so quickly kind of put me in a position where I had to, step in and be, quote unquote, at age 11, the head of household. I remember going to get my first job at age 15. I lied at my age. I'm sorry, supermarket guy. Sorry about that. But a man's got to do what he's got to do, right? So that was my first entree into caregiving, and then years later, my mother, who had a brain operation. I had my sister who was taking care of her and another family member during that time, and then when they fell ill, I had to step in and just kind of oversee both situations. The challenges are pretty intense because you're dealing with not only the responsibility of taking care of family, but then you got to deal with the whole admin piece with Medicaid and the managed long-term plan, and you've got the home health care agencies, and then you have the workers, and you're dealing with COVID. And then on top of that, you're dealing with relationships, personal and business, that get compromised too, because if there's any weakness in those relationships, they have a tendency to get exposed. And then, so it's a balancing act on many levels. And I could spend an hour talking about some of the experiences I've had with Medicaid. Ooh, boy. If I was the president, I would blow that thing up and start over. There's a lot of broken processes in there. But at the end of the day, the people that really need the care are the ones getting neglected the most because of all the other filters that go on between Medicaid and the end result, which is taking care of the patient. Not only just for my mother, but I spoke to people who are taking care of parents and loved ones, and they're all having the same kind of issue.
Well, Bob, thank you for sharing that. Caregiving is challenging, and I'm interested in hearing you talk a little bit about during COVID. Have those challenges? What new challenges did you have to face, or did it get more complicated in the caregiving process?
Complicated is not the word. Ooh, deep is the word. Okay, so we're in New York now. My mother lives in Westchester County, and that was the initial hotspot of COVID in Scarsdale, New York, and it kind of matriculated down into New Rochelle. My mother was about 40 miles northwest. Thank God she wasn't in the epicenter, as they say. But when my other family member was taking care of my mother, she got sick and she ended up having to go in and out of 3 nursing homes last year. That was a challenge because now you're visiting people at the nursing home, but you can't go inside. You're outside looking at family members through a window. Most of the time, it's dirty, it's dark, or it's raining. There's no seats outside, so you could be standing outside for hours just looking in a window. It's almost like you're looking at an animal or something. It was really a crazy time. And being in New York at that time, it was even more crazier. But that was quite a challenge last year. Thank God things have gotten a little better, but it has reduced the amount of available home health aides to take care
Yes.
of loved ones, and I think that's really the challenge right now. Even now, and they don't pay these people enough money. Good Lord, they need to do something about the pay structure of home health aides right now, so that they could feel more valued. But they're on the front line of this COVID thing, and they really need to be compensated more.
Yeah. Bob, it's heartbreaking, as we think about this and all that, that we're all going through across the country during this time. But for those who are caring for a loved one, it just really gotten complicated. AARP has a wealth of information for caregivers. The resources are all free and accessible online. One of my favorite is the Family Caregiver Guide. It provides 5 key steps for caregivers. The first one is how to start the conversation. And I just want to say, do not wait until you become a caregiver. Bob probably will attest to this, but
Amen.
start that conversation early. Forming a team. It takes a team to care for a loved one and identify who that will be. And sometimes it's not a family member, it could be a neighbor, a friend, or even your church family. Number 3, make a plan. Create a plan. All of the questions you should ask to create that plan are in this little guide. Finding support. Bob mentioned it a few minutes ago. The resources and the organizations that are available in your community. Start identifying those early on. Make a list. And AARP can help you identify those resources, those agencies. There's an online website. You can put in your zip code, and they'll help you find agencies close to you. And finally, number 5, care for yourself. It's critical. You cannot take care of others if you do not take care of yourself. If you have a doctor's appointment, keep it. Do those checkups. Take time out to breathe. Take a walk. How does that happen, Deborah, when I'm a caregiver taking care of my loved one, trying to work and do everything else? That's where that team support comes in. Bob, what do you say to that?
I concur with all of that. Let me tell you. Thank God I had a little experience with caregiving before my mother fell ill, but all those points that you make are so critical because, like you said, if you don't take care of yourself, then you're not any good to anybody else. So that is a key thing, and of course, it takes a village. Just like it takes a village to raise a young child, it takes a village to take care of seniors. And of course, with seniors being the number of seniors being on the rise due to the baby boomers all becoming the age that they are,
Yeah.
there's a huge need out here for seniors to be loved and taken care of. And the other thing is, you have to take care of yourself even before you get into the caretaking, being cared for. So keeping your immune system up, eating right, you know, maybe will prevent you from needing as much care as you may need in your senior years.
Yes, and Bob, you mentioned early on that your caregiving started with your father, and you were at a very young age. And that's part of what I was talking about when I talk about you never know, when you're going to get that phone call and you become a caregiver. A lot of us think, oh, we're not caregivers until we get older and our parents age. But Bob, talk a little bit. You were in middle school, am I correct?
Yes, I was 11 years old. My dad got sick, and I think sixth or seventh grade. So through middle
Wow.
school and the rest of high school, I had to basically not be able to go to any after school activities. So I think a little bit of my childhood, was stripped from me. But in the end, I don't mind doing what I did for family. It was something that I had to do. So I think it made me a stronger person, gave me more character much quicker. And, I learned the responsibilities of family at a very young age. So I'm grateful I went through it. I feel bad for dad not being able to do the things that he used to do because he was a photographer, a musician. He drew schematic designs of TV sets by hand during the day. And he was a mean pool player too. That man could
Mm.
play some pool, I tell you. But learning that at a young age was, helped me really deal with how to handle mom 40 some odd years later.
So, Bob, I want to give you an opportunity to just share with our listeners after your experience being a caregiver at a young age, and then again now in the midst of still trying to maintain your career, any suggestions or recommendations to our caregivers, some lessons learned that you learned along the way?
Well, again, one of the lessons was key relationships if key relationships are weak at the beginning of a caregiving process, sometimes they get exposed. It's unfortunate that people that you might think are in your corner,
Mm.
you find that maybe they have some ulterior motives or they just are not really there for you. You really find out who is in your corner that's got your back 100%. You find out who doesn't. And I learned that, unfortunately through this process. But, when you're taking care of family, you got to take care of family. And those who support you, you find out who is there for you. So that's one of the key things that I learned. But keeping the balance between that and your own life and making sure your family's good, and knowing something about the legal system, knowing something about power of attorney and healthcare proxy, and filling
Mhm.
out Medicaid paperwork and keeping good records, making sure everybody's wills are up to date. It's a process. The paperwork itself is just as intense as the actual physical caregiving, but it is
Yes.
so needed. All of those things have to be balanced out, along with the relationships that you have in your life.
Wow, you said a mouthful right there, Bob. I have to tell you. And I just want to remind our listeners that this Prepare to Care guide helps you think through all of those things, the things that you may not remember or to think about. So I would suggest that you visit our website. We're going to share the link here and go get a copy. Pull it down. You can view it online, you can utilize it online, or we can send you a copy at home. I want to thank Bob, but before I do, I want to say, Bob, you'll be AARP's guest artist in November with a special concert for caregivers. What can our listeners expect to hear?
Well, the recording and the show is a live show we did in the studio. It features some great musicians. I've got a Brazilian percussionist and a Latin jazz percussionist, Mr. Cafe da Silva from Brazil and Chimbo Cornell from Puerto Rico. And also have Miss Lori Williams on vocals, Porter Carroll, the former leader of the group Atlantic Star, on vocals, Tony Lewis on drums, Bob Franceschini on saxophone, and Mr. Dave Anderson on bass. All these guys are from, we flew up to New York to do the show, and we had a blast doing it, and I just can't wait to share it with you. And the show is going to be also available as a live disc. Um, you can find out more information about that by going to bobbaldwin.com. So it's a lot of music, and we only had 45 minutes, but I have about 2 hours worth of music, so maybe I can round up part two for you sometime.
Well, Bob, it has been a pleasure talking to you. I can't thank you enough. I wish you the very best. I'm so excited about the concert in November. I cannot wait. I'm wishing you and your family well, and I look forward to seeing you again in November.
It's my pleasure being here, and thank you, Deborah, and also AARP Atlanta, AARP Universal, and hope that you guys enjoy the music, and hopefully you learn something about me today.
Great. I have had the great privilege of chatting with Bob Baldwin. Baldwin sees himself as more than just an artist, but a human being in control of his destiny and with a legacy of artistic benevolence to pass on. I invite you to join us, AARP Atlanta, for an inspiring evening with world renowned jazz composer Bob Baldwin on November 12th at 7 p.m. This is a free AARP Atlanta couch concert celebrating family caregivers who often give so much to others that they do not care for themselves. Throughout the concert, AARP will share information about our caregiving resources. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you very much. Nice to see you.